Beloved, it is not the size of the enemy. It is the smallness of our capacity. We are too limited. We see prayer as a means of getting God to give us things rather than as a means of getting God to make us what we ought to be. And so we get the car, we get the house, we get the girl, and we remain desperately weak, incapable of standing up to any opposition, of standing up for God. So easily broken. This epidemic of weakness has to end. Hello, I'm Pastor Bola Ogedengbe, and this is Passion for God coming to you from Paris, France. And I really hope you enjoyed the last two programs because we took short clips from this entire series we've been teaching. And I think that they were very interesting. We're talking about partnering with God. Partnering with God, why? You know, the Apostle Paul, towards the end of his life, wrote to his son Timothy, and he said this. Let's read together in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 7 to 8. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. There is reserved for me in the future the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on that day, and not only to me, but to all those who have loved his appearing. Now, this is Paul telling Timothy how he has lived his life. And he says, listen, I've fought the good fight, I have finished the race, and I have kept the faith. I pray that that will be your testimony. I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, and I have kept the faith. Fight the good fight, finish the race, keep the faith. Fight the good fight, finish the race, keep the faith. And Paul, in writing to the Philippians, commends them on their partnership in the gospel. This church in Philippi partnered with Paul in preaching the gospel, not only in supporting him financially, but also in taking their own part in actively communicating the gospel. He talks about their standing with him in the defense of the gospel, in the communication of the gospel. And they also were actively involved in the communication of the gospel. And so this is how we partner with God. We partner with God. We partner with the church. We partner in making ourselves available to preach the gospel, in making our resources available for the preaching of the gospel, in devoting our lives to the communication of the gospel and for the salvation of men. Every single believer is called to partner with God. And we've talked about different things that are involved in partnering with God. And the first, of course, is to embrace the mission. This is why we are here. We've talked about catching the vision of the local expression of the body of Christ that we are a part of, because there is a vision that directs and guides our actions. There is a destination that the Lord has shown us. We've said so many different things about how we partner. We've talked about the actively working towards building. We've talked about excellence. We've talked about commitment and so many different things that have come up here. And it's very important for us to know that this is how Paul lived. And he's an example. He says, follow me as I follow the Christ. We are to be imitators of people who before us, who through faith and patience have obtained the promise. People who before us walked this path of the gospel. Why? Because today there is an adulteration of the message. There is a deviation in the way in which we live our Christian lives. We have become clients of God, customers of God, rather than servants of God. When you look at the church worldwide today, wherever you look, you will see this pernicious perspective of God being our benefactor and constantly digging into his heavenly purse to meet our needs. And we sitting back, just getting fat on his goodness. But that is contrary to the message of the gospel. The Bible tells us in Titus that we were saved to serve. And so if we are serving, then we are partners. And to be true partners, we need to inculcate into ourselves the mission of Christ. And we need to be totally one with him, perfectly intimate with the Lord. You know, some of us didn't serve because we were told to serve necessarily, but because we just got so close to the Lord that serving him became, as we say in good French, une évidence. Serving him became so obviously essential to our very being, not even to do anyone a favor, not to do the church a favor, not to do the pastor a favor, but because it was so essential to us that why would I not serve him? We literally begged for the privilege to be of use to him. And that is an essential point if we want to be partners. But there is one thing we're going to talk about today, which is a prerequisite for successful partnership. And the Apostle Paul modeled this in his own life, and we see it in the lives of the apostles, or all the other apostles as well. We see it in the lives of all the people that you and I know who God has used powerfully in generations past and in our generation today. And it's this, the spirit of faith. That's the concluding point we're going to be dealing with as we talk about how to partner with God. We must partner with God in a spirit of faith. It's absolutely essential. You know, there is one story in the Bible. Let's look together in Hebrews chapter 3. And we'll see later one story in the Bible that typifies the essentialness, if such a word exists, of faith in partnering with God. I'm not talking about faith for a new car, faith for money, faith for whatever. You will need to exercise your faith for money if you're going to partner with God, because the projects of God will require you to spend some money. And of course, you have to, if you walk by faith, you would not be putting pressure on the people and bugging them to give money. You will trust the Lord for it. But so we're not talking about meeting your needs necessarily. We're talking about responding appropriately to God by faith, because everything we do in life will require us to trust God. Whatever you do in ministry, whether as a lay person or as an ordained minister, will require you to trust God. If it does not require you to trust God, then perhaps it is not quite what you should be doing. So let's look together in Hebrews chapter 3. What do we see in Hebrews chapter 3? And in fact, this led to another series that we might take in this program, and it has to do with hardening of heart. Harden not your heart. In Hebrews chapter 3, verse 12, it says, "Watch out, brothers, so that there won't be in any of you an evil, unbelieving heart that departs from the living God." Listen to this, an evil, unbelieving heart. So unbelief in the eyes of God is evil. It is wickedness. It is sinful. In Hebrews chapter 3, verse 19, so we see that they were unable to enter because of unbelief. This whole passage talks about the people of God who were unbelieving in the wilderness. And because of their unbelieving, their hearts were hard. Because of their unbelief, their hearts were hardened and they were not able to enter the promised land. And so this talks about a day of rest for us as believers today, and says, look, you be very careful. Do not be like your ancestors in the wilderness, so you don't forfeit the promise of entering into rest as well. And so what he's saying here, he's saying to Christians, he's telling them, be careful to not be faithless people. Trust God so that you will receive the fullness of rest that he has promised you. Now, when we go back into the Old Testament and we try to understand what exactly was going on in all these different periods being mentioned here, because it took a certain amount of time from the time they came out of Egypt to the time when they forfeited the right to go into the promised land, we see that these people constantly provoked the Lord to anger. And in this passage in Hebrews chapter 3, we're not going to read all of it. It does say that they provoked the Lord to anger because of the hardness of their hearts and their unbelief. And so they continually provoked him because they would not trust him. They would not believe in him. He had a grand project for them to take them into the promised land, to establish them as a nation. And through this nation, Messiah was going to come to bless the whole of humanity. God involved these people in his superb project to save humanity. But what did they do? They refused to believe him. At every step of the way, they distrusted him. They would not agree. They got to Mara. There was no water to drink. They began to complain. You would think that people who had seen the Red Sea open and walked through on dry land and seen the armies of Pharaoh swallowed up in the waters would never again doubt anything that God had to say. but they doubted him, and they kept on doubting him, and they kept on doubting him. These things came to a head when the spies were sent to spy out the promised land, which God had promised to give them, which he had promised to Abraham over 400 years before then. So this is not something he was just inventing. He didn't just pull this out of his box of tricks and they were like, what is this? Where did this come from? No, these people knew that this promise had been made. And so God sent them via Moses to spy out the land. And they came back. And there were 12 of them who went. 10 came back. You know the story. 10 came back with an evil report. 2 came back and said, no, we can do it. And so what we want to see here is exactly what the interaction was and the lessons that we can learn from this. What happened? They came back and 10 of them said no. Now listen to this. They all saw the same thing. This is a lesson for you and I. If we are going to partner with God, we cannot go by the prevailing circumstances. We cannot allow ourselves to be impressed by what we see. We must be impressed by what God has said, because what God has said is bound to change what we see to correspond to what he has said. Now it seems easy, but we are dealing with real life situations. We have nations to win for the Lord. We here in France, it would appear that Christians account for no more than 1% of the population of France. They're evangelical Christians, born again Christians of whatever stripe, which means that there are less born again Christians in France than there are Muslims, than there are nominal Christians. And so this seems to be a huge challenge, a mighty challenge, especially because of the ideal of the secular state that we have here. And this whole thing about this anti-clerical sentiment that has been so prevalent in France, and even the mistrust of evangelicals. So we can look and say, there are giants in the land. And this is what these people said. Let me try and read this to you. They reported to Moses, we went into the land where you sent us. Indeed, it is flowing with milk and honey. It is flowing with milk and honey. And here is some of its fruit. However, the people living in the land are strong, and the cities are large and fortified. We also saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites are living in the land of the Negev. The Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites live in the hill country. And the Canaanites live by the sea and along the Jordan. And as soon as they said that, they had not yet quite said, we're not going. But they said it in such a way that Caleb stood up and said, it seems that Caleb quieted the people in the presence of Moses and said, we must go up and take possession of the land because we can certainly conquer it. So it says in verse 29, they said there are all these people living there. And then in verse 30, that Caleb quieted the people, which means that as they were saying, these people began to go, oh no, we can't do this. This is so typical. Listen, I don't know how many times you have heard people. I know when I first moved to France, I would hear Christians say all the time, oh, c'est dur en France, les Français n'aiment pas le Seigneur, c'est quand même compliqué. Now, if you wonder what that means, that's French for complaining. I would say Christians, now these are local bred Christians who would go, oh, but this country is too hard. People don't like God in France. We're just too anti-God. Yeah, we can do anything. And all that. The land is fortified. The people are strong. They're strong-willed against God. Everything is, everything is just against us. And that is the mindset that many Christians have. And so when you come and say, we are going to take the land, they think, are you out of your mind? So there are two categories of people here. We're talking about partnering with God by faith. And we're taking the example of Caleb, Joshua, and the 10 spies to show how different our attitudes can be in the face of the same circumstances. So then they said, we can't go up against the people because they are stronger than we are. Remember what God says about these people in Hebrews chapter 3, which we have just read. He said they had evil, unbelieving hearts. Another translation says a wicked heart of unbelief. This is what God calls this kind of attitude. Now to all of you brothers and sisters out there who spend your time moaning and complaining, especially those of us who are based in Europe, about how anti-God this society is, about how these cities are strong and fortified, about how the people are too strong-willed against God, about how we get criticized because we're churches and we can't find buildings because we're churches. This is speaking to you. Now, if we're going to partner with God in whatever society we are, we have to do it by faith. We think things are hard for us because we don't realize what obstacles those who went before us had to overcome. I like to talk about missionaries a lot, because I am absolutely amazed. I see myself as a missionary to France. And I'm absolutely amazed at the things that people before us endured to preach the gospel. And so we are a generation that likes ease and that likes comfort and that just thinks that God is on my side. He's there to make life easy for me. And that is not Christianity. Christianity is a religion of sacrifice. It is men and women who have been saved by the blood, who have been brought to who life anew in God, who now make that life available to God, whatever it may cost them, so that his name will be known all over the earth, so that the Son of God will be celebrated, recognized, so that he will save men from their sins through the preaching of the gospel, through our lives, whatever that may cost us. Now, these people said we can't go up. They are stronger than we are. There are so many Christians today whose mindset is the world is stronger than we are. The unbelievers are stronger than we are. I was speaking to someone the other day. We went to this place and had a special camp. And I was speaking to somebody there that hadn't seen in a long time. And this just reminds me of what they were saying about how we Christians are weak. And I was like, weak? No, we are not. We are stronger. We are stronger than they are. The one who is in us is stronger than the one who is in the world. And it's not just bravado. It is reality. There is a consciousness of dominion that must come into the child of God. No, they are not stronger than we are. We are stronger than they are. And I began to tell her about one of my daughters who, when she encountered me, was one of those Christians who was weak. She was weak at work. She was weak everywhere. And then I began to speak to her and she listened. She listened. She listened. And she put into practice the things I taught her, how to behave at work, how to affirm her authority as a believer, how to stand, how to bring the life of Christ, how to bring help to the hurting where she worked. And today, she is one of the most highly respected people where she works. And people who are not even Christians, you have people who are atheists, you have people who are Muslims, they look to her for help. They look to her for counsel. They come to her to pray for them because they have seen the power of God. No, they are not stronger than we are, but we have to be inhabited with that mindset. Now let's go back to Caleb, Joshua, and the 10 spies. So they gave a negative report to the Israelites about the land they had scouted. The land we passed through to explore is one that devours its inhabitants. We're going to see another difference in perspective in a few minutes. It is one that devours its inhabitants, and all the people we saw in it are men of great size. And so what was the impact on the people? The impact on the people was total rebellion. The Bible says that the people lifted up their voices, and listen to this, they broke into loud cries. The people wept that night. The Israelites complained. Listen to this, loud cries, weeping, complaining, loud cries, weeping, complaining. That is the story of many believers. Anytime they have to do anything for God, they break into loud cries, they weep and they complain, they murmur, they grumble. It's too hard, it's too difficult. You know, sometimes I sit back and I feel like crying. I feel like crying because I see Christians complain. They are given little things to do and it's too much for them. And they complain. And you look at them and think, what are you, an extraterrestrial? Where have you been? Why are you so weak? Why have you not strengthened yourself in the Lord? All the messages you have said, where have they gone? You have heard, where have they gone? Why have they not built capacity in you? Beloved, it is not the size of the enemy. It is the smallness of our capacity. We are too limited. We see prayer as a means of getting God to give us things rather than as a means of getting God to make us what we ought to be. And so we get the car, we get the house, we get the gun, and we remain desperately weak, incapable of standing up to any opposition, of standing up for God. So easily broken. This epidemic of weakness has to end. And I must say, this is not a feminine thing. In my experience as a pastor, I have seen so much weakness among men. In fact, as far as I have experienced, the men have been weaker than the women. And that is probably because they don't pray as much as the women. I have found a shocking percentage of men that are so spiritually weak, incapable of dealing with problems, of facing obstacles, of breaking through in hard places, standing firm when things get tough. This has to change, beloved. We will not conquer the territories we are supposed to conquer by remaining so weak. These men were weak. These people were weak. Loud cries, weeping and complaining. Write that down. Think of the difference with the Apostle Paul. He fought the good fight of faith. He finished the race. Can you see? He fought and he finished. He fought and he's finished. These ones didn't fight and they certainly did not finish because they did not even start. Now let's take this further. The people complained. They complained about Moses and Aaron. They complained about their leaders. How many times did we complain? What's Pastor telling us to do this? Because you should do it. Yeah, but it's too hard. No, it's not too hard. You're too weak. That is the problem. We have raised a generation of namby-pamby Christians. We have raised a generation of Christians who don't have the stomach for war. We have all these big men standing in our churches with their chests looking great. They're very great at the gym, but they have no spiritual muscles. And so they go home and beat their wives because they're exasperated. Something happened at work. I say, bro, you're a Christian. You should not be doing such things. And then we tell the women, submit to them. Submit to the spiritual midget who's beating you up. No, okay, now that is a digression. You can pretend you didn't hear me say that. Now let's continue. And so these people were so afraid. They wished they had died in Egypt. Now see how far they have gone. How I almost said, how strong is their weakness? How profound is their inability to face challenges? That is the state of the church today in many places. And so they begin to imagine these dire things that are going to happen to them. But God says go. And they say no. But these other men, I thinking how distressed Moses must have been. I mean, he gave up his quiet life in the wilderness to go and rescue these people. The man had to deal with Pharaoh. Over and over again, he went to see Pharaoh. And apparently at the risk to his life, except that he trusted God. He went through all of that hardship, brought them out of Egypt. And now at the point where they are about to enter the promised land, they chicken out on him. And they begin to insult him. They want to stone him. And then they say, why has the Lord brought us here to die? Do you know, sometimes you see these Christians and they say, yeah, you know what happened to me? And this happened to them and now they're going to sulk and they won't talk to God for several days. And you just look at them and you think, what is the matter with you? Were you saved by the blood of Jesus or by what? Why is there so little allegiance to the Son of God? Why is there so little commitment to Christ? These people had no commitment to God and they had no commitment to his plans. But you see, I think of Moses' distress and it's so encouraging. It's not that his distress is encouraging. It's just that sometimes as leaders, we face the same things. We see people and they just refuse to cooperate. And we're like, let's do this thing. You can see the success. You can taste the victory. You see what is going to happen if they would just stretch themselves a little, just a little. And we can take this territory. We can win these people. We can reach this neighborhood. We can consolidate these new believers. We can build these new churches. We can do so much more. We can reach so many more people. Just do this. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's not complicated. And they look at you like, they want to kill me. It's a mountain. It is so hard. I'm supposed to do this. And 2, and 3, and 4, and 5. And they look at you so fallen as if you're about to kill them. And this takes days and weeks and months and years, and they still refuse to go and take the land. And you can almost taste the victory. I can imagine what Moses must have felt here. But then, as they rebelled against the Lord, and so it wasn't just Moses, now it's God himself who is to blame. We are so often like that. I wonder because we read these stories and we think these people were so terrible. And we don't even realize that it's talking about us, about the modern day church, about how cowardly we are, how unwilling we are to face any opposition, how unwilling we are to extend ourselves and expend our energies and apply the resources that God has given us to take in the territories He's told us to take. How easily we chicken out on Him when things get too hard. How easily we leave things we know we ought to do that will definitely make us reach the people we're supposed to reach just because we can't be bothered to fight. You know, Caleb and Joshua, God bless them. Every pastor, every spiritual leader needs a Caleb and a Joshua. Every leader needs a Caleb and a Joshua. When there are those who just don't get it, who refuse to stand up, who refuse to fight, who refuse to believe, you have those ones who say, we will do it. We will follow you. We believe in the vision. We believe we've heard from God. We believe we can take this land. We believe we can build great churches. We believe we can get people saved. We believe that this land is not too hard for us. We believe we can plant churches in Paris, in Lille, in Besançon, in Perpignan. We can plant churches in Marseille, in Cannes. We can plant churches in all the regions. We believe we can do it. We know the Lord will help us. Caleb and Joshua. There are times when it's a Caleb that needs to speak, not a Moses, not even an Aaron. There are times when it's a Joshua that needs to speak. May God make you a Caleb and a Joshua. And if you're a minister of the gospel today, may He give you Calebs and Joshuas. And so Joshua, son of Nun, Caleb, son of Jephunneh, who were among those who scouted out the land, tore their clothes because they were grieved at what the people were saying and doing. They knew that this was wrong. This is all we have time for in this program. We're going to continue with this message on the spirit of faith because it's so important. We cannot be true partners if we do not walk in faith. I'm leaving you with that for this program, and we'll continue on the matter of faith. To be a true partner, you must choose to walk by faith. Shalom. Many of us today know what God's plan is. We know that Jesus has a grand project of bringing the world to Himself. We know that Jesus said, go and make disciples of the nations. We know that He gave us a commission and a mission and a mandate. We know that He entrusted His work into our hands. But many of us have looked around and thought it's too hard. You know, the 10 spies came and said, those people, yes, the land is good. And we say, you know, it would be wonderful if France was saved. How nice it would be if Paris was saved. Can you imagine how great it would be if on Sundays in Paris you saw people going to church? You know, wouldn't it be nice? You know, we see it. We see the destination. We think, oh, it would be nice. And the land is good. They came back and said, the land is so wonderful, but it's too hard. These people are stronger than we are. That is a fundamental principle you must keep in mind. Every time you think that something that God tells you to do is desirable, decide that it is also feasible, because it is. It is. And even if you think it's not desirable, decide that it is desirable. You choose to find it desirable. Hello YouTube, this is Pastor Bola Ogedengbe, and I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel. I hope you're blessed by the wonderful content that we put out. God bless you. Oh, and rush to the blog also and subscribe and get your free ebook.